period out of which apocalyptic literature emerged and flourished is roughly from 200 BC to 200 AD. But the period just before that is known as the Proto-Apocalyptic period, in which writings began to show signs of development toward what would later be defined as the apocalyptic style of literature. And we see some of that in the prophets of the Old Testament, in which they not only begin to incorporate some apocalyptic themes, but also incorporate some of the imagery that reflects the Canaanite mythology of Baal, now replaced by the God of Israel, riding in on the clouds and bringing life and salvation for his people. A couple of the prophets reflect this, but two in particular I just want to focus on right now, is chapters 38 and 39 in the book of the prophet Ezekiel, and chapters 24 to 27 in the book of the prophet Isaiah, which is popularly known as the Apocalypse of Isaiah. In the book of the prophet Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39 speak of a war against one called Gog, who is from Magog, which means the land of Gog. And Gog is a personification of all Israel's enemies. And he rides in from the north to destroy God's holy people of Israel. Well, through the prophet Ezekiel, God tells his people that it is he himself, God himself, who is drawing God forth so that God can manifest his power over Israel's enemies. So he draws Gog forth, making him think that he's going to destroy God's people Israel. But then it is God who intervenes and wages war against Gog of Magog on behalf of his holy people. In this battle, we see a shaking of the earth, a shaking of the seas. The birds of the air are shaken. The rocks are split. Elements of the storm theophany in which God rides forth and saves his holy people. As in the mythology of Baal, in which after the battle against Yam, in which he rides in from the sea and rains down the harvest on the people, there's a great celebration of the harvest and a great celebration of life. So at the end of the battle against Gog, in chapter 39 of the book of the prophet Ezekiel, God declares a banquet for the people to celebrate God's great victory over all of Israel's enemies, personified in the figure of Gog from the land of Magog. That shows early signs of apocalyptic themes and an apocalyptic style that eventually led to that period out of which apocalypse as a form of literature flourished. Another portion of the prophets is what's called the Apocalypse of Isaiah. And that consists of chapters 24 through 27 of the book of the prophet Isaiah. And in many Bibles, you look at that portion of Isaiah and it will have the heading, the Apocalypse of Isaiah. And in that portion of Isaiah, we see themes of God riding in on the storm, but especially we see the theme of the banquet. It's a very popular reading for funerals, because it speaks of the banquet on which God's holy mountain he will provide for all peoples, juicy rich foods and pure choice wines, a great banquet of victory, where it is also said that it is on this mountain God will destroy the great enemy not only of Israel, but of all nations. He will destroy the web that is woven over all nations. And it says, I will destroy death forever. So that's definitely an apocalyptic and eschatological theme, that death itself will be destroyed. And this great banquet will be the celebration when God will destroy death. And we certainly see that fulfilled in Jesus, who on Mount Golgotha, in his death, destroyed death. And we have that great banquet in the Eucharist, in which we celebrate Christ's death and resurrection. But the imagery we see in the Apocalypse of Isaiah, early indications of a movement of literature toward the apocalyptic images and the apocalyptic themes. In Ezekiel, we see personified in Gog all of Israel's enemies who are destroyed by God and defeated by God, followed by a great banquet. In the Apocalypse of Isaiah, we see God intervening for his people and all people of the world and declaring a great banquet to celebrate the destruction not only of the enemies of Israel, but of the enemies of all people, the great destruction of death itself.